Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm really excited to have as my guest today Gary Katz. He is a psychotherapist and has founded the Center for Intimacy Recovery in New York, which focuses primarily on intimacy and relationships. He has found that without a sense of intimacy with oneself, people can't fully experience intimacy with someone else. The Center for Intimacy Recovery helps clients find ways to have intimacy and connection in life they are seeking and to uncover all the ways that they have learned to play it safe and protect their hearts, which at times can get in the way of intimacy. Prior to opening this practice, Gary worked in education for over 20 years as a rabbi. Interesting background. Can't wait to hear more about that. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Adriana.
Yes, yes. I always like to start the show off by having our guests tell us a little bit about themselves and how is it that you came to be doing this work that you are. An interesting transition there from one career to another. Tell us more about that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think for me, like many therapists, I don't know for you, but for me, a lot of my drive towards my work was born out of my own personal work, my own personal experience. Um, and so in trying to, you know, have more intimacy in my life, which I would also define as feeling okay with myself, and then being able to feel okay with other people, it kind of bore that out. And so, also, as a first career working in education, primarily middle school, but also adults, and working as a rabbi, the call to like teach and help others through teaching is the same call to me as like helping others through this, through therapy. It's really about helping people to continue to grow and learn more about themselves and be okay with themselves. So all of that was born out of various parts of my own journey, I guess you could say, of first wanting to just feel okay with myself, in my own skin, and wanting to also know myself better, seeing parts of myself that I maybe exiled, to use IFS language. For those who don't know it, it's a modality of therapy, but using parts of myself that I wanted to pretend didn't exist because they were too uncomfortable to feel or look at. And in learning to face those parts of myself, to me, that's what intimacy became. And then in turn, being able to let someone else see them, because if I'm not going to see them, I will never let you see them.
Well, exactly, right? And that's often where the proverbial shit hits the fan, right? Is in relationships.
Yeah.
Like we can be in denial and pretend to ourselves all day long, but it's when we get into this very close, vulnerable kind of dynamic with another person that oftentimes this stuff that we were avoiding will come up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So, what are some, with the clients that you work with at your center, what are some of the common issues you see with them?
Yeah. So, like I said, when we define intimacy, most people assume intimacy means sex, just for whatever reason. In fact, um, I have quite a few clients who pay me by check because they don't want Center for Intimacy showing up on their credit card because it's assumed to be about sex. And so, we definitely um, do deal a lot with sex and are very sex positive. So I would hope that nobody would feel ashamed to have something show up about sex in their life, but I understand privacy. So the types we get, I guess, are they revolve around how I was defining intimacy with the ability to know myself, and then looking at the things that we all develop ways to avoid some of that because it's painful. And some of those are more drastic, and some of those are temporary. Like having a rough day at work and not wanting to sit with my feelings and putting on a silly 30-minute TV show is avoiding those feelings, but I come back to them. So I'm not ignoring them. I'm not exiling them. I'm coming back to them. But if I develop strategies in my life or a maladaptive coping skill or skills that become maladaptive to avoid feelings with myself or seeing parts of myself or others, then it becomes, painful because my life will start to constrict more and more. And I also am going to not know that I'm doing certain things and wonder, why did I do that? It doesn't make sense because those parts of mine that I'm ignoring do have energy and they're going to push me to act in a way sometimes. So those show up the most with our clients. And we have the typical classic sex therapy type of clients coming in for functional issues around sex individually or as a couple. Maybe they're struggling to connect sexually and they come in as a couple. Maybe one person is having um, functioning issues, like for a man, erectile issues or vaginismus or painful sex for a woman. Or maybe there's a discrepancy in the levels of desire and the frequency that they're wanting sex. Maybe there's hurt and vulnerability in the relationship around sex because of there's so much vulnerability in sex. Um, and maybe there's this desire to experiment and explore other things, but the fear of sharing that either with your partner or even the fear of doing it and wanting to come in and talk about it because having shame about it. So we deal with all those traditional sex therapy issues and others. And then we also deal with some of the ways that people avoid connection with themselves, specifically through sex or avoidance of sex. So, people who might use sex as a way to avoid intimacy with themselves. One of our former therapists, Lindsay Erickson, wonderful therapist, she used to always say, like, sex is supposed to be connective to myself or to someone else. And so if I use it as a way to be disconnected from myself or disconnected from someone else, then I want to like think about what that is. Why am I using it that way? So if someone comes in with some type of problematic sexual behavior that maybe they're living outside their value system, maybe they're living in secrecy, maybe they're hurting their high risk behaviors for themselves or for others, maybe they're harming their partner because they're lying to their partner and their partner is consenting to what they think is the relationship, but the relationship has so much more going on. Those come to our office a lot. And that ranges from what I would call infidelity, meaning like a one-off affair, a one-off stepping outside the agreement in the relationship, to more extensive, like systematic secret sexual lives. Um, and then also we deal with the impact of that on people too. Like, so the person's partner, when they may discover that their partner's had a secret sexual life, um, that, we would call that betrayal trauma, the trauma of being betrayed by the person who's supposed to regulate your system. We work with that a lot as well. And then I would say we also work with like the whole gamut of intimacy avoidance, because using sex to disconnect is a way to avoid intimacy. So when we think of a traditional avoidant person, we think of the person sitting at home with 35 cats, eating ice cream, watching Netflix. Nothing against cats, by the way, and people who have them, just want people to know that. But that's what I think of when I think of like a stereotype of, you know. So that's on one end of the spectrum of intimacy avoidance. And then you have this whole long spectrum where the other end might be like chasing from relationship to relationship or having sex, even though it's with people, it's avoiding deeper intimacy if I'm doing it in a way that's to avoid myself. And then all the things in between, like the person who gets into a relationship and can't get past like the 6 month or 1 year mark for whatever reason, or the person who their wiring is kind of disconnected so that they can have sex and they can also have safety and intimacy. But when you put them together, one cancels out the other. So they can't function sexually when they're feeling connected to someone because it's too vulnerable. So the whole range of intimacy avoidant behaviors we help people with.
And it is such a wide array of issues, right? And all the different ways in which it can show up. Now, a lot of the viewers and listeners to this podcast know that I love to talk about trauma. So can you say, you mentioned betrayal trauma, and that is pretty clear what that is. But let's talk a little bit more about like the origins of people's challenges with intimacy,
Yeah.
both with themselves and partnership. I would think earlier experiences of trauma are going to have a pretty big impact in this arena.
100%. And again, right, like I'm sure that your regular listeners already know this, like it doesn't mean a one-off horrific traumatic incident when we say trauma. It can be, a little every day. If you go to where there's like a stream and you watch water just drip down, eventually that soft water, just the repetitive action puts a hole in a rock, right? Because it just hits it again and again and again. So often the most impactful traumatic experiences are not the largest, but it's the repetition of it. It's the frequency and the repetition of it. So I would start, with by using the term relational trauma. That's a big one here. So it's not necessarily sexual assault, physical assault, an accident, a car accident type trauma, although sexual assault and physical assault are forms of relational trauma, I guess. But even if, I would ask people, what did closeness feel like as a child? A, what did it feel like to you and your family of origin? And B, what was modeled to you? When I'll do an exercise often with, we do like a 6-week introduction to intimacy group. And one of the exercises we do is draw your childhood home, which every time we do that, I'm blown away how many feelings that brings up for most people, and put yourself in it. It's not an art class, just draw the stick house or whatever. And then, we process what feelings come out just from that part of the exercise. But then I'll have them write down the word like affection. What was modeled for you in your childhood home about affection? Did your caregivers show affection to each other? Did they hold hands? Did they ever kiss each other? Did they show warmth? Did it feel adversarial? What did love feel like? Because what it felt like is what we're going to be drawn to. So to come back to your question about what role does trauma play, if 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 there's relational trauma, which could be, as a child, which could be in the form of neglect. So if love didn't feel good, it felt abandoning. Well, then I'm going to look for Miss Not Available or Mister Not Available, right? If I'm a young girl and my primary male role person is a emotionally one-dimensional dad, who that's all he learned. I'm not trying to badmouth anyone's parents, by the way, but then I'm going to seek a emotionally one-dimensional man. If I have a dad who's a rager who like can be all good and everything, but then blow up at any moment, or a mom who's like that, I'm going to seek a person. So then love feels to me good and never knowing what's going to happen. So then I'm going to seek an edgy relationship, probably. Like, oh, I'm gonna pick the bad boy who's gonna like have a temper or do something crazy or pull away all of a sudden, or the woman who can flip out or also pull away somewhere. Something that's gonna create that edge, because that's what closeness feels like. The person who's like steady as a rock, they're not even on my radar if love feels dangerous. So that's where I think trauma really plays a role of like if my relationship to connection, love, security, emotional security was impacted by I wasn't able to be vulnerable, let's say, right? Like if I asked for help, I got yelled at. If I showed feelings, I was shut down. Well, now I learn, how many times does a child do that before they learn not to do that? And then that becomes kids always make probably the best decision in the moment available to them. So they're going to learn to shut it down or seek it elsewhere or develop an internal world. And then they grow up and bring that coping mechanism into their adult relationships. So if growing up having needs was scary or criticized, I sure as hell am not gonna walk into a relationship and, like, show my heart and my needs right away or even early on, because 'cause I'm getting ready to get criticized. So I probably have learned to play my cards really close to the vest.
Yes. I think that's such a great description of how this stuff comes to be. And it also affects, what we in as therapists talk about as being attachment styles. Can you say
Exactly.
a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was talking about, just without that phrase. But yeah, so attachment styles is, the development and the theory that as at the way that the child learns to attach to their caregiver and that their caregiver attaches to them impacts how they attach to their next significant emotional attachment, which is usually your romantic relationship. So if I had a caregiver, a mother or a father, my primary caregiver was very calm and there for most of the time. That would be called what they call secure attachment. I could trust that they're going to be there most of the time. No parent is there all the time. No matter how big their cape is, no parent can do that. But if they're a good enough parent that they are there consistently most of the time, then when I meet someone, that's what love feels like to me. So I'm going to expect that person, and I'm going to trust that that person's going to do that. If my caregiver growing up was inconsistent, significantly inconsistent, whether it was like in presence, like being with me and showing up emotionally, or their emotional state was inconsistent, I'm going to be like, every morning, every day as a little kid, what's the temperature? What's the temperature? Do they still love me? How do I know? Let me check. Let me check. I'm going to read the room. And so then I grow up and I meet, and it may not happen with friends, although it can, and it may not happen with distant relationships, but when we meet an emotional partner, it activates our nervous system similar to the way our early caregiver did. So that's why sometimes I might be able to handle friendships and other things, but when I get into a romantic relationship, I go haywire. And we all probably have friends that we know. And if we're therapists, you all have clients like that, but we all have friends that we know, or maybe ourselves, that we can be very rational in our regular life. But then when that person meets someone and they get their heart opens a little, their nervous system just like, woo, like, because it's activating something that a regular friendship may not activate. So if growing up, it was like, come here, go away, come here, go away, or never knowing when the rage is gonna come out, or the criticism is going to come, or the love is going to be bestowed or not, then when I grow up and start having an emotional relationship, I'm going to be like needing to check, what's their temperature? Do they love me? It's been 3 minutes. Why didn't they respond to my text? Oh my God, they're leaving me. You know, they didn't text me, when they landed. Are they dead? All that stuff. It's like, so that would be like anxious attachment. So the way we bring, the way we are, what the love I described earlier is like what love feels like, which is another way to say the way we attach to love or just or caregiving into our adult relationships. And so and then as you get older, when you bake into it other things like sexuality, secrecy. If I grew up in a house where there's secrets, and even if they're not, even if we don't have a family meeting to announce we have secrets, people feel it. People feel something's up, or they learn that their parents have secrets. Sometimes a parent even says to a kid, "Don't tell your mother." And I don't mean like, "Oh, we got an extra donut." I mean like, like I've had, hiding an affair. A child discovers a parent's affair, and the parent is like, makes the child keep the secret, or the child feels they need to. Well, they've now internalized the message non-verbally, sometimes verbally, like the example I gave, that secrecy is okay.
Right.
And so, yeah, that person's not going to then grow up and have secrets. So when we, like, little, young boys who might discover their father's pornography, or young girls who just, how does that shape them? How does that shape their view about sex and secrecy? So those are things that we really want to explore and look at because, unfortunately, there's so much shame baked into so much about sex and all, it's sad. Um, And so we want to help root out some of that shame. And anytime, that something is secret, there's often a shame or surrounding the secrecy. So I remember one time in my first career as a middle school teacher, and I used to give the seventh grade sex ed talk a lot. One of the schools I taught in, they first had the students go and talk. They give them questions to discuss with their parents about sex. And then we would come back and discuss those discussions, we would have a discussion in class. And the reason is because if the squarest people which was always your parents, can talk about sex, it takes it out of the subversive, the secret, secrecy. And so many people, like, where did I one of the ways that I learned about sex, which I think was pretty normal in my age, was from other boys or in middle school. I'm the oldest, so a lot of times people learn from their older siblings' friends. I didn't have that because 'cause I'm the oldest, but I'm hearing words and I'm like, "What does that mean?" What does that like, pretending like I know. And so we're all discussing it secretly, and it can take on even though there's nothing shameful what those kids are doing, but it can feel shameful because they can't let the teachers know, they can't let their parents know, and if there's verbal or nonverbal messaging going on at home as well, or at school, or in a community about sex, kids internalize that. So if it's like there's a rigidity around sex, I don't mean like what you can and can't do. Every family is going to decide that. But if just the way it's talked about or not talked about, kids pick up on that, and that shapes how we all as children start to look at sex and like, oh, I can't talk about it. It's a secret thing.
Right. Now, you mentioned pornography, and that got me thinking. Well, I'm curious now with the availability of just pornography in a way that never was when we were. I mean, when we were kids, you were lucky to catch a boob on like the H if you didn't have HBO and you had it like
Correct.
kind of
Yeah.
semi blocked out.
Right.
Remember,
Like,
like, ooh,
see if you, yeah. Yeah.
trying to
I
see
did
some
that.
body
I did
part.
that. Yeah.
But yeah, right. And now it's so readily available. What do you think that is doing? I'm curious. What are you seeing in younger adults, or I don't know how young you work with, but like, what do you think? What impact might that be having on people's sense of true intimacy and sexuality when that is out there so
Yeah.
readily?
Yeah. It's interesting because that you're bringing that up because right now, as we're talking, there's a case going on in Texas about is it legal for a state to require adults to show proof of their age to look at pornography online. And so there's the whole fight between free speech, I should be able to write or read or anything I want, or say anything I want, versus safety. And what's very interesting in this case is that, and I just read, there's an article I just read about it recently, that to walk into a store and to purchase pornography, you do need to show ID in almost every state, right? But to go online, you don't. So it, the the law has not caught law and in turn society has not really caught up with technology and pornography because the difference with what you described, whether I was, I did the same thing as a kid. We didn't have cable, and so I was like trying to see the squiggly line through the squiggly lines, and like, ooh,
Right.
or somebody from their older brother or their father, probably shoplifted from a store. One of my friends had a couple, pornographic magazines. So what are you looking at? You're looking at maybe one person, maybe two people having sex, or a few people. I don't know, but it's an image and that's it. And the rest is your imagination. What people can see, what you can access today, and I don't think I'm telling this to anybody that doesn't know it. People know it, right? Is so much more. I can watch 100 different bodies in 1 minute. I can watch a compilation of 200 couples with having sex. So I'm seeing more types of pornography as a child or an adult or whoever's watching it. There's more available. And so some of the impacts are it's accelerated certain things more into the mainstream. Like basically when I, as a kid, and my friends brought magazines over or whatever, or I would say also like VHS tapes. That was when I was growing up where pornography was. You basically saw two people or a few people, depending on whatever the movie or the clip was, having sex in some form. Nowadays, there's so many more graphic and types. And so I remember one of the last years I taught sex ed to the kids, one boy asked in class what a scrotum was, which is a very valid question. But he also knew terms from porn that I didn't even know what they meant. So it's this disparity that these young minds who don't even know sexuality, first of all, have not had sex, but also don't even know all the basics. They're being exposed to things like choking, degradation, a lot of stuff like that. And so there's an article also recently about the study done about the increase of choking in teen and young adult sex. Yeah. So I think it exposes people to more. The other thing I would say is that, going back to one of your first questions, like it can block the ability to develop vulnerability, which is essential for real intimacy, right? Like when I was in middle school and I liked a girl, maybe sometimes I got the guts up to tell her. Sometimes I told her someone has a crush on her and I can tell you their initials, whatever silly, goofy ways, when we fumble and we get rejected, but we develop the muscles for intimacy. I went go over and ask a girl out or a boy out. You don't have to do that with porn, you know? And also, if you think about even adult relationships, right? Like in an actual live adult relationship, you have to negotiate sex. If you have kids, carpool. You have to negotiate cleaning dishes, cleaning the house, who are spending your parents and my parents for holidays, like, who all these layers of relationships and sex. In porn, you don't have that. So, yeah, it can have the potential to inhibit young adults. It's a place that they can go feel good and be aroused and then maybe masturbate or something, but then they may miss out on some of those other important skills. So I that's what I do see a lot, especially with young men, I would say mid-30s down, when it came of age, with pornography was really on, it was online. Um, that sometimes they don't develop the skills for intimate relationship and they don't have the ability to like make the relational reach that's necessary.
Well, and if you actually look at a lot of the content, I know there's all different kinds of pornography and some of it is made a little differently, but it's also the way that sex is depicted, sometimes violent in this sort of and women just sort of, and just stereotypically, right, acquiesce
Correct.
to whatever. And then people, I think a lot of kids grow up thinking that's normal, like the choking, for example. I read that article as well, and I was kind of shocked that something like college women reported like 68% of them or 60 some percent of them reported that a partner had tried to choke them during sex to enhance the pleasure. And I'm sorry, but when I was in college, I did not know people doing that. That was not
Yeah.
something that was that mainstream or common. And so I wonder, yeah, if that's it's skewing kids in terms of like the expectation that sex needs to be this intense, potentially violent. And so the loving, caring, nurturing kinds of more feminine, we might call stereotypically feminine aspects of it, I think sometimes get overlooked, and that can affect emotional intimacy, right?
100%, 100%, yeah. I mean, if you would look at most pornography, especially heterosexual actually also same-sex pornography, but it's usually like, "Yeah, you're the greatest," or "Do it again. Oh my god, you're so great." Like, it's all praise. So again, that's not very real. As opposed to like, "Ow, not over there," or negotiating like 2 minutes before we're trying to be sexual, you're yelling at me or you're saying, "Why don't you leave your socks on the floor?" So, or "Your feet are so cold." Ow, like, unless there's a genre of like nag porn or argument, there's probably is argument porn. There's probably every type of genre, but I agree. Like it can be a inhibitor from developing the ability to have an accurate sense of what sex is like, what relationships are like, and also what bodies are like, and also sexual positions. Like most, many people I know, probably I would say late 30s down, when we really talk in detail about their sex life, I've learned that a lot of their sex life and like positions and what they're doing is porn informed. And I've sometimes said to them, I've asked them, does that position really feel good for you? Because the way you two are like connected or what you're doing isn't a pleasure spot. It's a camera angle spot. You know, the whole thing, the same thing, for example, like, and it's a huge thing in porn, and it's an area where you see like more of it in young adult sex is like a man orgasming on a woman's face. There's nothing pleasurable for a woman in that.
And yet the porn makes it look like it is, like she's
Like,
enjoying
oh my God,
it.
like that's the
And
best
that
thing.
should be the expectation, right? Then
Yeah,
then kids think, oh, this is normal. And as a woman, you're like, I have to subject myself to this because he's going to expect that because that's what people do.
right.
I
And
had a
so
yeah, go ahead.
what I was just gonna say is like, that's a camera angle thing. When a man ejaculates inside a woman's vagina, they haven't gotten the technology yet to have that shown on camera. I mean, they probably could through medical devices, but so they had to figure out a way to show the impact, the amazing orgasm of, for a man, the primary consumer, that would be camera friendly. And but like, like with many of these things, I check often with both people, and especially young women. I want to make sure that they're doing something. Whatever they do is fine, but I want to make sure they're doing it because they want to and not because they're scared of not being loved or liked by their partner.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, given what they're seeing on the screen, they become very performative, and that takes out the true connection and the true, like, yeah, what feels good to me and what feels good to my partner versus I'm supposed to look like those people in the porn, you know? So anyway, we could go on and on about that. Um, but let me shift gears a little bit. And because now addiction is going to go hand in hand with this, I'm seeing more and more clients in my practice who have developed addiction to sex or to porn, often co-occurring with substances as well, right? We all know about chemsex, or well, probably not everybody does, but that's a big thing. And I live in San Francisco, so that's huge in the LGBTQ community here. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what's the role that addiction plays with issues around intimacy?
Yeah. Well, addiction is a form of mental illness, right? And any type of mental illness prevents full intimacy. Because if I'm not fully present or I'm not functioning in a full state, I can't be fully intimate. So, if I have a dependency on something, alcohol, drugs, food, sex, love in unhealthy ways, that's going to inhibit my ability to be fully intimate because I may seek it through connection, right? But, like I may drink with a bunch of friends, so it feels like I'm not drinking solo at home or getting high alone at home and doing it with a group of people, which is, I guess, more intimate than doing it alone. But first of all, I'm in an altered state, so I'm not intimate with myself. Second of all, like if it's about me, I'm not fully intimate with the other person as well. So the same with sex. If I'm using sex to alter my state for an unhealthy way, I mean, I guess it alters our states and all the time sex does. But if it's to again like to escape myself, my feelings, um, if it's creating internal strife and shame inside myself, or if it's hurting other people, then we have to look at it, and um, it can get masked in a lot of ways, especially for men, through machismo about how many sexual partners you have, like that. So it can get masked, and that just like probably escaping in work can get masked through promotions and efficiency and productivity. And for women, it can get masked as like I'm a really good girlfriend or a good wife, or I'm really want to be in a relationship, and yeah, everybody wants to be in a relationship, so that gets masked, like the self-destructive part of it. So we look at it in a non-judgmental, shamey way, helping people look at, in what ways is this getting you what you really want in your life, and in what ways is it getting in the way of what you really want.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I have found, like, for example, with some of the clients who have developed pornography addiction, their partners, and it's been a few times now, and this is, that I've seen it, where the partner has become like addicted to porn, and it was a secret. So then it's like a big, betrayal shock. Like, I can't believe you've been doing this, behind my back. And then I think there can be a sense of rejection, like I feel rejected. My partner would rather watch this on a screen than be
Right.
with me. And then I do think it can create barriers because, yeah, you're right. You said it earlier. Like, it's much easier to just watch it on this. Now I have to deal with a real person and their moods and maybe they have their own baggage around,
Right.
intimacy and sex. Like, this is a lot easier. And so I've seen it create a lot of distance between partners when that
100%.
shows up. Not always, but it can.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so the majority of people who look at pornography, for example, don't don't have a dependency on it, don't use it in a addictive way. I mean, the amount of people that visit one of the main pornography sites are more than all of Facebook, Instagram, and I think Twitter combined. So all those people don't have addictions. They probably use it and put it down, just like the majority of people who drink alcohol don't have a problem with it. But somebody who is avoiding intimacy with their partner, they're reaching for their phone instead of their partner, or somebody who is avoiding getting into a relationship because it, or there's, I mean, I've met people who spend 8 hours a day watching porn. Right? That's not healthy. That's inhibiting from work, from life, and everything else. So, you know, um, they have to learn how to connect both arousal and and vulnerability and intimacy in a relational way. So they have to connect those two wires, and it takes a while for it to develop new neural pathways to do that. Um, there's a really it- there's a good movie that does a good job of showing this, which is I think it's called Don Juan, and it kind of goes over the top of certain stereotypes, especially New Jersey Italians. I'm just going to say that, like over the top of like the Jersey Shore type character. But what it does an excellent job of is a the male who's the main character. He's lying in bed next to his girlfriend, played by Scarlett Johansson, is beautiful, sexy, wants to have sex with him, and he would rather watch porn. It also shows they use cleaning there as an example too. He uses cleaning the way he uses porn, like it's to avoid feelings. There's a rigidity to it. And they do a good example showing Scarlett Johansson's character as kind of having like what we call like love addiction, like a fantasy version of what love is and how those two interact. But yeah, I've worked with many clients who have, who are going to avoid their partner because of the emotional vulnerability. Like anytime you say to your partner, whether it's somebody you just met that night or whether it's a relationship of decades, that you say, do you want to have sex with me tonight, or do can we have sex tonight? You're taking a risk of rejection. And so again, going back to that thing before, so that's so much more risky than porn.
Right. Porn's not going to reject you.
No.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes so much sense. So now you have some interesting, I would say more innovative ways to work with that type of addiction. Can you tell us more about that?
We really look at, first of all, if somebody, one of my mentors used to say, when I feel, let me rephrase it. When I act out sexually, I don't feel. When I act out sexually, I don't feel. When I feel, I don't act out sexually. So the first thing we want to do, like most of the times when someone's acting out some form sexually, it's from bottled up feelings. And so we want to create emotional literacy. We want to help people know what their feelings are, because that's what you really want to deal with, not the surface behavior. If you can address the feelings versus, it's just like, emotional eating. I can lock all my Oreos up, but and ice cream up, but I'm avoiding the feelings. So if I can learn how to handle the feelings, I'm not going to do the behavior. That's a coping mechanism. So the first thing is you want to create emotional literacy, helping people, especially men who, because of masculinity messaging as kids, as boys, disconnect from their feelings to not show vulnerability, because that's bad. Because it's like women, don't be a girl, weak, which is a whole that impacts men's views of women also. But so emotional literacy, and then the ability to share your feelings once you know them, because many of the people doing this are very conflict avoidant, so they stuff their feelings again and again until they come out either through anger or through sex or love. So we want to teach them to be emotionally literate, to learn how to share their feelings in a relational way. And then we also want to build up the ability to be vulnerable and intimate with other people and themselves. So that's why we have, for example, I think we have right now 13 groups at the practice, because that meet weekly, because group therapy is such an amazing support and way to develop intimacy skills with other people, where you're really being candid and honest in a safe container with the safety and guidance of a therapist. There's less skin in the game than your relationship or your family of origin. So you can build these abilities to have relationships and then take them into your family life and have and develop them there more. So that, and then we also have been working in the past year, and we're about to do another retreat, actually two more retreats, one in March and then one again in the summer, using a psychedelic called ibogaine. And so ibogaine is a psychedelic. It's based on a plant from Africa, and it helps people to get in touch with their like authentic self. It goes below addiction, depression, anxiety, below trauma, till you get to, like, if you picture that like cute, adorable, lovable baby, it gets you in a sense, just like we look at a baby, like we're not critical of it. It's just love. It helps people connect to themselves in that way. So a lot of the things that generate self disconnection or disconnection from self, it goes below that. So they learn how to stay connected to themselves and to have the ability to tolerate feelings and not feel shame and things like that. It's not a magic pill. There's no such thing as I mean, it would be great if there was, but there's not. But it's another tool. And I've found that it really accelerates because, in addition to like emotional literacy, um, learning how to speak up about your feelings. Also, part of what has to get changed is shame reduction for the person acting out sexually, and also core sense of belief that's usually connected to shame, like I'm broken, I'm unlovable, no, but I'm horrible, I'm evil, all the whatever the wording is, something in that like type of tape. So this accelerates the connection to the belief that like I'm okay as I am. Yeah, I've done things that hurt people. That's human. I don't like things about myself, but that's okay. I'm human. So it really takes people and shows them how not to think that thing like an affirmation, like I'll convince myself I'm these things, but you feel it in your heart. You feel it in your own body. I did it myself, and it was probably the most profound healing experience I've ever had.
The psychedelics, I mean, they've been around, especially the natural ones, they come from nature, have been around that people have been using them for thousands and thousands of years. And there's so much promise there, for what, I mean, MDMA is not natural, but like, the early beginnings of MDMA, ecstasy, was in couples therapy. They were using it before it was made illegal. There was a widespread use of MDMA to increase intimacy. So I think for this kind of work, whether we're dealing with the addictive aspects of it, because Ibogaine has been shown to be very helpful in helping people break addictive patterns. Drug and alcohol addicts also will go to other countries and do it, right? I've had clients who've done it. But then also healing the trauma, that people are carrying around. I mean, there's so much possibility with that. I think it's really exciting that you guys are using that in your practice.
It's very exciting, I think. It is to me. I also just feel the need to say it is illegal in the United States. So I want to clarify, like, we're not doing anything illegal. It is legal in countries like Costa Rica and Mexico. And in fact, in Mexico, they have state licensed facilities with doctors and nurses, and that's where we take our clients to. I think right now, at least right now, we're the only practice like therapy practice in the country that I know of that runs groups for people to go do this as part of their treatment, extended treatment. And just like any type of intensive experience, whether you go on a couples weekend intensive or if you go to inpatient treatment for substance abuse, right? Intensives are only as good as the aftercare.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with this. If somebody here is going to go do have a psychedelic experience, A, you want to pick a place that's safe and reputable, so you should check that out. But B is you need to have good aftercare. So you can really, and everybody talks about it, and in the psychedelic world, they use the word integration, which is a great word, but it's integration, integration, integration. But they don't have the structures, I don't think yet, of real. There are you can find people who can help you make a scaffolded structure for yourself, but really important to have good aftercare so you can integrate whatever amazing insight and experience that you have through a psychedelic experience into your ongoing life. Yeah. So we we have our groups meet several weeks before we go, so they form a group dynamic and start to open up and prepare ahead of time together. And then they're required to stay in group after the experience too. That's the aftercare. And I'll just be honest. I made a big mistake when when I decided to try to bring this into our practice here. My first thought of who I wanted to do ibogaine have, what clients I wanted to take were partners who have been betrayed by their intimate partner in some form, because um, it's trauma. Because their symptoms that I was seeing could take 18 months to 2 years to reduce. That's a long time. Sometimes even longer than veterans from combat. And then there was a study that was done with combat veterans and ibogaine, and when it described their PTSD symptoms, I'm like, that's the same as I'm seeing with these clients of betrayed partners. So I wanted to help bring them relief because they're in such acute pain. And the mistake I made was, clinically, it was the right decision because I feel like they need so much relief and they're in such pain for so long. But business wise, it wasn't smart because many of the betrayed partners, when I shared this with them, they're like, that sounds amazing. Take my spouse, take my
Yeah.
partner instead.
Right.
Right? Like, if you can fix him or fix her, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
So but that was the first group. It was a smaller group that we brought. It was a group of women we took to Mexico, and they had a tremendous experience. I mean, I could not believe, I felt so fortunate to be a participant and a witness to their experience. And then I brought a group of men dealing with addiction. Actually, two of the men also were betrayed partners, but also dealing with, let's say, sexual shame, problematic sexual behavior, or sex addiction, childhood trauma. And, again, like, in the immediate effect is you feel amazing for a while, et cetera, et cetera. But the long-term effect is dependent on what's the work you do afterwards. And I saw some people who are still, after that trip, are changed people because of it. Like, it changed not just maybe addictive behaviors and things like that, but it changed things like anger, like your primary, especially for men who often their primary mode of relating is pissed off and angry, not sad, not hurt, not lonely, but anger because it's acceptable socially. To watch men learn how to, like, go below that and live in a space like not always angry, which changes the whole dynamic in a house and in a relationship, or for children if they have children. It was really profound. So we have another trip we're doing. We're taking a group in March. So what are we now? Like 2 months from, I think, tomorrow. And then we'll do it again in the summer. And yeah, if anybody is curious about it, there's plenty of information online, but I'm also always happy to, both about our trips, or if people just want to know about it individually for themselves, to explain it. Because it's not, I would say that ibogaine is not it's not the most popular psychedelic in the class. Ketamine is very popular because it's legal now in the country, and I would say ayahuasca is right now
It's
the cool
huge. Yeah.
it's the cool kid of the psychedelic world. In fact, most of the time when I start talking about ibogaine, people are like, "Oh, you mean ayahuasca?" And I'm like, "No, I don't mean ayahuasca." They're different. You can look up online. They work a little differently. Also, the length of the experience is different. Um, but ibogaine is really a heart medicine, and I found, like, if we can find alternative ways to accelerate people's healing, whether from betrayal or addiction or trauma, as long as they're safe, why not use them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think set and setting and safety, when you really like frame it in that kind of way, the growth potential and the healing potential for these substances is huge. When
Correct.
it's a double-edged sword. If misused, if not with all of the support like you're talking about before and after, it can be traumatic in and of itself. So
Correct.
it's not something to take lightly. I think a lot of people are kind of jumping into the whole psychedelic movement, feet first without even checking to see what they're diving, into, or head first without even seeing what
I
they're
agree.
diving into.
Either
Right?
way, yeah.
Yeah,
I
either
agree,
way.
and I think it's very brave of you to say that, because I think it's not cool to say that right now, because psychedelics are so cool. I mean, one ibogaine treatment center I spoke to, the one that we partner with in Mexico, called Ambio Life Sciences. They're in Baja, just south of San Diego. He just told me that because 2 weeks ago, there's a podcast that had both, is it Rick Perry or Rick Scott, the former governor of Texas, and also, and I just forgot the guy's name, somebody Dobbs, the person who's done a lot of work around ibogaine in this country, on the Joe Rogan podcast. And they went from this place in Mexico went from getting 5 inquiries a day to 50. So um, it's very cool. It's very popular, psychedelics. But yeah, I've even told people don't do it now. Like I did a podcast, a webinar on it a year ago, and I had somebody reach out right away. I got to do it. I'm like, I don't think you're ready. He wanted to do it, like, for the reasons I take men, like trauma, shame, problematic sexual behaviors. And I'm like, you first need to connect. Like, you need, like, what I would call, like, sobriety. You need to, like, have space from what you're doing to start to feel better about yourself on a basic level of, like, self-esteem and other things. To then you'll get more, the more work you do before, the more you'll get out of it.
Yeah, agreed fully.
Yeah.
This is such profound work that you're doing, Gary. I've loved this conversation. If the people want to know more about you and your work, your center, where do they go?
I'll tell them 2 ways. First of all, they can just go to intimacyrecovery.com. That's our website, intimacyrecovery.com. And the other way is, I invite, whether they're, lay people or therapists or the average person, I invite people to reach out and email me. I may not be able to work with every person depending on my schedule, but I would certainly want to take the time to help people find a path for whatever they're seeking: healing, therapy, ibogaine, whatever it might be. So, and if somebody's a therapist or wants a case consultation, also happy to do it. I mean, that's the teacher part of me still. So, the best way to reach me is my email. It's my name, Gary Katz, GaryKatz, at intimacy.com. And that, I will make sure to get back to you, and we can set up a time to chat or something like that, or correspond via email.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And thank you all who have been listening and watching. If you really like this information, you find it useful, please help us get this out there in the hands of more people. Share, subscribe, like, review, all the things that get those algorithms to get this stuff out there. Thanks again, Gary. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.